Hey everyone, this is Derek Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network. Today we are going to talk about the latest propaganda from the state regarding social media, Facebook, fake news, election tampering, things like this, and where it's all going. First off, I want to remind you guys to please bookmark theconsciousresistance.com, our website, where you can get all kinds of new content, including the latest documentary bringing down Jeffrey Epstein, and much more. And of course, if you want to support us via Patreon, support me, you can go here and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And this allows us to do documentaries like the aforementioned Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. It's paid for by Patreon supporters, so please consider signing up. So let's get right into it. The election of the year, the election of the century, they say, is just days away here in the United States, the midterm elections of 2018. And as I've been saying for the last couple months, we're going to see amping up of this idea of election interference. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen this idea first put out by Donald Trump that the Chinese were attempting to interfere with the coming elections, not the Russians this time, and now it's the Chinese. Honestly, I think that all countries, especially the U.S., try to interfere with each other's elections, so it's not a big surprise to me one way or the other. So Ron Wyden, though, after Donald Trump's initial comments back at the United Nations Security Council in New York last month, where he said, regrettably, we found that China has been attempting to interfere in our upcoming 2018 elections. And then in another interview with 60 Minutes, he also said the same thing. He said that he believes China interfered with the 2016 election. So Senator Ron Wyden recently questioned Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, saying you can't have it both ways, after Coats refused to issue an unclassified statement in response to Democratic lawmakers' questions about Trump's statements regarding China and the elections. So we're already kind of seeing this floated about that there's something we're not being told about the Chinese interfering, maybe the Russians again. So in a couple of days, whoever loses, the loser is going to say it was because of fake news, is because of social media, it was going to be because, of the Russians or the Chinese, and we will see the continued push towards controlling social media. Now, you remember a couple of weeks ago we had hundreds of alt-independent media Facebook pages unpublished, including the Anti-Media, Free Thought Project, Cop Block, Police, and many, many others. And if you did not see that report, check out this link. But one of the things that we've been talking about is the fact that independent alternative media has been falsely labeled fake news, and in their pursuit, let's give them the benefit of the doubt for the moment, okay, and say that, okay, they're actually trying to fight fake news. These people, Facebook, Twitter, and these other companies, YouTube, and they're under pressure from the government and from the people to do something, right? Well, I guess if we ignored that the whole Russian hysteria was, a fraud from the beginning, we could go that route. But again, let's just go with this for a moment. But even if we take that scenario and say they're trying their best, okay, well, maybe they accidentally went after some pages that all happen to be cop accountability pages or anti-war pages or anti-establishment pages. Maybe that's just a coincidence, right? But then you have things like the Twitter purges happening on the same day, people getting taken down off Twitter, YouTube strikes, and just total coordinated activity. Twitter making no statement, YouTube making no statement, and Facebook making a statement just saying that it had to do with spam and inauthentic behavior. And of course the Deadstream corporate media just repeating that press release around. So now we are more than a few weeks away from that incident, almost a month out now since the purge took place. The elections, as I said, are on the horizon. And I want you to take a look at the news media from around the global perspective, because this is a trend that I've been seeing. First, you see this. Okay, last month, a couple weeks back in October, disinformation and fake news spreads over WhatsApp ahead of Brazil's presidential election. So now the election has just passed, but leading up to that election, there was again this idea that fake news was spreading, memes and conspiracy material were spreading through WhatsApp. And then you also have this, where WhatsApp actually bans more than 100,000 accounts, very similar to what happened on Facebook. And of course, Facebook owns WhatsApp, so remember that as we go through this. So they, again, said that they were trying to thwart false information on its social network. And this was before the October 28th runoff elections. And then let's go a little further into this. How WhatsApp turned Brazil's 2018 elections upside down, an autopsy report. So now this is post-election. Now let's look at this little segment here. The burden of fact-checking rests on the shoulders of users, a heavy lift in a country where over half of the voting population has not completed high school and many are very new to social media. However, the issue is not only digital illiteracy, but also lack of access to legitimate methods of verifying information. Critically, though, partnership with Facebook, many cell phone plans in Brazil, particularly on cheap prepaid phones, do not include data, but now this is the key section, grant users exclusive access to WhatsApp and Facebook as the sole entry points to the internet. This enforces the primacy of the two platforms as sources of information and obstructs users from consulting other sources in real time to check facts. So they're basically plugged in directly to WhatsApp and Facebook, and this is something I've complained about in the United States, but imagine if you have a cheap, like this one said, a cheap prepaid phone, and that is the only way you can get to the internet is through these apps. They are your literal direct connection. So that's a very important piece. They're a filter for people. Then this one from the Business Standard says, fake news took lives in India, swayed Brazil's polls. What can be done? And this is, again, pushing more of the same idea. And we'll get into the India situation in just a moment. And then this one here from The Hill, Brazil election shows it's time for digital resilience. This is an opinion piece from Robert Braga, a native of Brazil, who is an associate director of the Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. Oh, that might sound familiar. So let's read this piece from Mr. Braga. He says, this is why in 2018 the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsh Latin America Center and the Digital Forensic Research Lab partnered on hashtag #ElectionWatchLatinAmerica to identify, expose, and explain disinformation where and when it happened around elections in Brazil, as well as in Colombia and Mexico. Going one step beyond fact-checking and working alongside partners in the region, including think tanks, medias, and universities, the Atlantic Council researchers used open-source data, anything publicly available online, to explain how cases of disinformation emerged, who they affected, who amplified stories, and what came out of that circulation. So, again, they're saying right here that, yes, of course, this shutting down people before the election is a product of Facebook's partnership with the Atlantic Council, which, as I wrote about back in May. And so since May, we've known that they partnered with this Atlantic Council that is, filled with military-industrial complex power players and different important people, funded by the U.S. government, departments of Air Force, Army, Navy, Energy, and the U.S. mission to NATO, as well as many other people. Check this article out if you don't know anything about the Atlantic Council still. So, of course, all of this pre-election stuff is related to the Atlantic Council, because the Atlantic Council is the same people driving the purge that happened over here in America 3 weeks before the election. So then they purged 100,000 accounts. Now, I haven't spoken to any activists down there, but my guess would be that some of these pages that got purged, I doubt they're all actual fake news and conspiracies. My guess is there are people who might be actually calling out some of the BS going on in the government that got caught up in this. If anybody has any details on that, please reach out to me. But let's look a little further into the international scene. Report Swedes bombarded with fake news ahead of elections. So this is last month, September, now almost 2 months ago. It says that Sweden, an Oxford University report on Thursday showed that Swedes had been bombarded with fake news stories on Twitter in the run-up to the Sunday's election. So again, pre-election, stuff going on. Many of them deliberately containing misleading information about issues like immigration and Islam. In a 6-page report by the university's Oxford Internet Institute, mapping the 2018 Swedish general election on Twitter, researchers concluded that as many as 1 in 3 articles recently shared on Twitter and relating to Swedish politics were, quote, junk news, as the authors described the, quote, articles. So they put articles in quotations, scare quotes. The researchers said that the sources behind the fake news stories were, quote, deliberately publishing misleading, deceptive, or incorrect information purporting to be real news about politics, economics, or cultures, and that they contained various forms of extremist, sensationalist, and conspiratorial material. So, again, labeling people fake news, saying that the Swedes are absorbing too much junk news, too much fake news, that up to the election, people have been bombarded with this junk news and fake news, and how can they worry about that? How can they deal with it? Germany's fighting fake news. They're installing up to 50 million, fines up to 50 million euros for social networks that don't remove posts promptly. France is also trying things. So this is just, we're seeing this fight against fake news spread around the world. WhatsApp has been linked to lynchings in India. Facebook is trying to contain the crisis. So it says widely distributed hoaxes sent on the app WhatsApp have been blamed for more than a dozen lynchings across India. Facebook has deployed a series of new features in recent weeks to try to fix the problem. So this goes on to basically say that fake news in the form of hoaxes are spreading around, and it's leading to lynchings and people are getting killed, and it's pretty crazy. So now Facebook is through WhatsApp is trying to figure out how to, stop this, and they're labeling messages to indicate that they might be forwarded from somebody who, they shouldn't trust and things like that. But again, there are some important aspects to this when you recognize it's pretty much the same way that the situation in Brazil works, where it says that WhatsApp basically is a central point for people to enter the internet in India. Like for a lot of people, it's the same way that it's set up in Brazil. So you see the same situation where people are becoming dependent on these platforms, WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, which is partnered with the Atlantic Council, which is funded by a bunch of military-industrial complex folks. So they're fighting off fake news ahead of elections in Sweden. They're shutting down accounts in Brazil. They're trying to find ways to control the spread of fake news in India via WhatsApp. So this is happening on WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, which is partnered with the Atlantic Council, and it's all being manipulated from behind the scenes by the Atlantic Council, and also now we know another name, the George Marshall Fund, the German Marshall Fund, which I talked about in this video, who's behind the ongoing alt-indie media purge, which you must watch if you haven't yet. So that's it for today, folks. I just wanted to get that information out to you and to remind you that this is going on, that this is what I've been predicting for a couple months would take place. My next prediction, whether or not it's true, we'll have to wait to see, but I do believe that after the election, when we get all this ramping up and hysteria about interference in the elections, there will be more of a call to, at least in the United States and maybe globally, to break apart these monopolies and to make them into public utilities, further putting them in the hands of the government and further stripping away freedom of speech on the internet and, more control. But thank you guys for listening. Please, once again, bookmark us, follow us at theconsciousresistance.com, and follow and support on patreon.com if you'd like to. For now, I'll talk to you guys next week. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.